67 BC, 3828 AM. The Romans occupied the kingdom of Pontus. King Mithridates with an army of Pontus, Armenians, Scythian allies and others invaded Pontus and fought against 2 Roman legions. Again, here occurs yet another odd meteorological phenomenon in the life of Mithridates. A comet appeared the year of his birth, another comet in the year he became king of Pontus, and later a meteorite struck the ground between the Roman army and his own host, stopping a battle. Now, in 67 BC, between the Roman camp and that of Mithridates, a terrible tornado appeared, and Appian wrote that such a whirlwind was unknown in living memory. There were casualties of both animals and men in both camps. The Senate in Rome gives Pompey unprecedented power to carry out what the Romans called the Pirate War in the Mediterranean, according to Tacitus. The war actually began in 68 BC, and Pompey was sent out with 270 warships and 120,000 soldiers, with 4,000 cavalry. The Romans painted the conflict as an expedition against pirates, but this masked the true campaign. The Romans sought total Mediterranean dominance, but there were strong pockets of resistance spread across the islands. For a long time, piracy was sanctioned by the enemies of Rome, and even funded to disrupt Roman shipping, free slaves from Roman galleys, and foil all naval plans of the Romans. So successful was this loosely confederated campaign that the Romans had had enough, and Pompey ended most of it. By this time in history, the thousands of islands of the Mediterranean and Aegean were populated by descendants of Israelites, or peoples with high concentration of Israelite blood. By this date, the ancient Hebrew prophecies declaring that Israel will occupy the isles of the world had come true from the Black Sea to Gibraltar. Pompey captured or destroyed 846 pirate vessels and occupied Crete, making it a Roman province. This was 1380 years after the exodus of Israel in 1447 BC, and the 864th year since Israel and Judah split into the divided kingdom in 931 BC. This was also 1344 years after Israel invaded and took the country of Argob and Bashan from the giants in 1411 BC, and 1188 years after 1255 BC, when the Danaan Israelite dynasty of Mycene was founded in the Peloponnesus. 1. The Poison King. 2. Tacitus, Annals of Imperial Rome. 4. Pliny, Natural History, Zoology. 66 BC, 3829 AM. Pompey of Rome defeated Mithridates of Pontus, but Mithridates escaped. Pompey continued his conquest of the East. In this, the final year of the Romanid apocalypse comet chain, Pliny the Elder reported an unusual occurrence during the consulship of Gnaeus Octavius and Gaius Scribonius. A star appeared over Italy, and a spark fell from this star, the spark growing in size as it drew near to the earth, becoming the size of the moon. It appeared to be enshrouded in clouds and departed as if on fire. This was witnessed and recorded by the proconsul Silanus and his entourage. 1. The Poison King. 2. Pliny, Natural History, Universe and the World. 65 BC, 3830 AM. Tigranes of Armenia surrendered to Pompey of Rome, giving Rome the territories of Mesopotamia, Syria and Phoenicia. This was 1300 years after Israelites migrated into the Peloponnesus and Aegean in 1365 BC, and interestingly, 1300 years after the fall of Rome in 476 AD was the year when the descendants of Israel founded the Empire of Adoption, known as the United States, in 1776 AD. This was the 444th year since the founding of Rome in 753 BC, and 520 years since the fall of Judah in 585 BC. Amazingly, this was 684 years after the Romans abducted and raped the Sabines in 749 BC, which itself was 684 years after 1433 BC, when the anciently famous King Latinus of Italia died, succeeded by King Albinus. 1. The Poison King. 63 BC, 3832 AM. Powerful earthquakes ruined Asia Minor as recorded by Cassius Dio, Livy and Orosius. A quake felt as far as Rome. Pompey continued his war of conquest into the east. Rome had become the devouring wolf, a terrible beast and scourge among nations. The Romans were propelled by plunder, a creature that found that its own survival compelled them to turn against allies, invade new territories, impose heavier taxes, enslave whole populations in order to pay the administrative costs of ruling others, selling off whole populations into servitude, and terrible deaths as galley slaves, dungeon, mines, and brothels. Countries were raped for their resources. The Romans created a monster of war, carnage and misery, unable to cease its atrocities or it would implode. The whole world its enemy, only unending war and conquest could give Rome security at home, as its provinces were ever bloody battlefields. From a biblical perspective, Rome epitomized the spirit of Esau, brother and hater of Jacob, Israel and Judah. This was the 690th year of Rome, or 138 times 5. The quakes occurred in the 250th year of the Syrian-Greek Seleucid calendar, or 3,000 months. In fulfilling the role of Esau, the Romans now attack and overlord over Judea, as Pompey enters the region unopposed and creates the Roman province of Judea and Idumea, Edom, ending the Jewish Hasmonean dynasty. The occupation of Jerusalem by the Romans was prophesied in Daniel's works. This year of 63 BC was the epicentral year of Daniel's prophecy of the four empires, dreamed by Nebuchadnezzar II, which began in 603 BC when the Babylonians invaded and occupied Jerusalem 540 years before 63 BC, when Pompey of Rome invaded. 63 BC began a 540 years countdown to the fall of Rome in 476 AD to the Germans, descendants of the Cimmerian and Scythian Israelites. This total period from 63 BC seems to be divided in 1080 years of the Four Empires prophecy. This was also the year of Octavian's birth, the first emperor, starting 540 years before Rome's last emperor. This year, 63 BC, was 864 years after the Egyptians sacked Jerusalem and the Temple in 927 BC. And this was the 868th year of the divided kingdom, 434 being a period of judged time. This was also 1344 years after the exodus of Israel in 1447 BC. Sadly, the great enemy and famous Mithridates of Pontus, feared and hated by the Romans, died an ignominious death in this year. Having lost his kingdom, his own son, seeking favour with Rome, trapped him in a tower where he had sought refuge with his family. Mithridates drank poison, ending his life, rather than allowing the Romans to take him alive. In this he had followed the example of Hannibal. Southern Syria and Samaria were also under the rule of Rome. The Jews were openly hostile toward the Samaritans. Jews refused to travel through Samaria, lands formerly occupied by the 10 tribes of Israel, going around and over the Jordan River. The Samaritans were a people first deported from Assyria to occupy the land of Israel. But over the centuries, more and more people descended from ancient Israelites wandered back into the land, especially the Gauls. The Samaritans were possessors of the Torah, avid adherents to the Old Testament faith, the laws of Moses, and they claimed to possess copies of the ancient books of the Hebrews, older than those had by the Jews. But the Jews would not socialize nor validate their claims. The Jewish prejudice against Samaritans was extreme, the Jews even refusing generous offers of money and assistance in helping to rebuild the temple. Even at this early date in Jewry, Jews originated with Judahites in Babylonian captivity. One's beliefs were not nearly as important as one's ethnicity. Samaritans were not allowed to serve in Jewish synagogues, in courts, and everywhere the Samaritans found themselves ridiculed. Jews went to the extreme of popularizing the doctrine that there was no place in heaven for Samaritans. The animosity against the Samaritans was ancestral and stemmed from 931 BC, the Israelite civil war that created the divided kingdom between Israel to the north and Judah to the south. 1. The poisoned king. 3. History in quotations. 5. Christ, the power and the passion.